What if the small act of kindness you repeat every morning, something so ordinary you barely notice it, is actually the moment someone else has been waiting their whole life to witness? Most people rush past strangers without a second thought, but not Ethan Miller, a 8-year-old maintenance worker from Portland, Oregon, a widowed father of a 10-year-old girl named Harper, and a man who has spent the last 3 years holding his world together with overtime shifts and quiet resilience. Every dawn, before heading to the high school where he fixes leaky pipes and flickering lights, Ethan slows his old pickup truck beside a narrow overpass to help an elderly man with trembling hands lift a crooked bicycle chain back into place. The man rarely speaks, just tips his faded baseball cap and whispers, "America needs more men like you." To Ethan, it's nothing more than a minute of kindness. To Mr. Arthur Walker, it is the only moment of connection he has left. But Ethan has no idea that the quiet stranger he helps in the cold morning mist is a former aerospace engineer with a past buried deeper than his silence, and that one day, federal lawyers will arrive at Ethan's doorstep asking for him by name. And before we move into this true story, if you believe small acts still matter in this busy world, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, so every week I can share another real story that reminds us how ordinary kindness can change extraordinary things. And now, what do you think will happen when this single father's name appears in the will of a mysterious old engineer? Let's begin. The bell over the maintenance office door at Lincoln High School rattled every morning at 6:02 a.m., just as it had for the last 3 years. It was never quite a ring, more like a tired metal cough that matched the way Ethan Miller felt as he stepped inside, balancing a thermos of lukewarm coffee in one hand and a folder of work orders in the other. The hallway lights flickered as they warmed up, bathing the empty corridor in a pale, uneven glow. Posters for last year's homecoming game still peeled at the corners. A water stain crept across one ceiling tile like a slow-moving continent. Somewhere down the hall, a locker door slammed shut from the night custodian's final round. Ethan set his coffee down, rubbed the back of his neck, and looked at the list waiting for him on the desk. 2 broken heaters, 3 flickering classroom lights, 1 bathroom sink that wouldn't stop running, and a note from the principal. "Please check the gym bleachers. Safety concern." He sighed through his nose, the kind of deep exhale that tried to push out more than just tiredness. It wasn't the work that exhausted him. It was the math behind the work. All morning he would be patching and fixing, tightening and replacing, making things last one more semester than they were designed to. All afternoon, he'd be thinking about numbers. The hospital bill from 3 years ago that still hadn't disappeared, the rent due on their small 2-bedroom apartment, the cost of Harper's inhaler refills, the rising price of groceries that somehow seemed heavier than the bags he carried up the stairs. His wedding ring finger still felt strange bare, even after all this time. Some mornings, when the alarm first went off and the sky was still ink dark, his hand would reach instinctively across the bed, to where his wife used to sleep, before reality rolled in like cold water. Mia's laugh still lived in the apartment, caught in the corners like dust motes in light. She had been a nurse practical, stubbornly hopeful, the kind of person who brought homemade cookies to night shift and remembered every patient's name. Lupus had taken her in pieces, first her energy, then her hair, then her breath. The insurance that was supposed to help had left Ethan with a stack of bills thick enough to wedge under a broken table leg. He had picked up extra shifts at the school, picked up a second job at Lewis Auto Shop, rotating between oil changes and brake replacements until his knuckles cracked and his back ached. He had learned to make dinner in 20 minutes or less and to say we're okay with a straight face even when he wasn't sure they were. The one thing he hadn't learned how to do was stop being there for other people. "Dad?" Harper's voice floated back in his memory. From just a few hours earlier, when he had leaned over her bed before leaving. She'd been curled up under her galaxy print comforter, a tangle of dark hair splayed across the pillow, her inhaler resting on the nightstand within easy reach. Her eyes had blinked open, still heavy with sleep. "Do you have the early shift again?" she whispered. "Yeah." "Bug," Head murmured, brushing her hair back gently. "But Miss Carter is taking you to school, remember? I'll see you in the afternoon." Shed nodded, then reached out and hooked her pinky finger around his. "Promise you'll be at my science fair this time?" The question had pricked him sharper than any tool in his belt. "Promise," Head said. And Head meant it, even though he didn't yet know how He'd make it happen between the school and the shop. By the time Ethan finished checking his tools and hoisting his worn canvas bag over his shoulder, the clock on the wall read 6:18 a.m. Outside, the sky over Portland was a soft, dull gray, the kind that made everything look a little more tired than it was. He locked up the office, walked out to the parking lot, and climbed into his pickup truck. The seat creaked under his weight. The engine sputtered once before catching, a low rumble settling into the cold air. He backed out, turned left, and drove toward the overpass. He had never planned on having a morning ritual with a stranger. It had just happened. Maybe that's how kindness begins, he thought sometimes, not with a plan, but with a pause. The overpass always felt a little out of place. Portland had its pockets of beauty, tree-lined streets, murals on old brick walls, coffee shops warm enough to melt the chill out of your bones. But the stretch where Ethan slowed down every morning felt like a forgotten seam between neighborhoods. A narrow bridge of concrete and rusted railings, traffic snarling beneath like an impatient river. At 6:32 a.m., the same thing happened every day. The bicycle appeared. It was an old, steel-framed thing, the blue paint faded to a tired gray along the edges, the chain sagging just enough to slip if pushed too hard. The man pushing it walked with his shoulders hunched into his coat, cap pulled down low, a scarf wrapped twice around his thin neck. The first time Ethan had seen him, months ago now, the rear wheel of the bike had locked up completely. The man had been standing on the sidewalk, truck and commuter traffic streaming past, one hand shaking as he tried to work the chain free. Cars went around him. One driver honked as if the old man were in the way on purpose. Ethan had braked without even thinking about it, head rolled down the passenger window, leaning over to call out, "You need a hand, sir?" The old man had looked up, eyes pale and sharp beneath bushy brows. For a second, Ethan had seen something like suspicion there, then exhaustion, then a flicker of embarrassed relief. "I don't want to hold you up," the man had muttered, voice rough with disuse. "I've got a minute," Ethan had said. Head pulled over, hazard lights blinking, and stepped out into the cold. Close up, the man had smelled faintly of machine oil and peppermint. His hands were mottled with age spots, fingers gnarled like the branches of the winter trees that lined the street. "Name's Ethan," he had said, crouching down to inspect the chain. "This bike giving you trouble?" The man had made a soft huff of something that wasn't quite a laugh. "You could say that. Been giving me trouble since 1984. Ethan had looked up at him, eyebrows raised. "You've had this bike since '84? Longer than some marriages," the man had replied. That had been the first time Ethan had heard the hint of wry humor in his voice. It had taken him less than a minute to slip the chain back on, fingers working with a familiarity born from years of tightening bolts and fitting parts together until they made sense. "There," Head said, standing and wiping his hands on his jeans. "You're good to go." The man had studied him for a moment, as if trying to memorize his face. Then Head tipped his faded baseball cap, the brim frayed at one side. "Arthur Walker," Head said. "And America needs more men like you, Ethan Miller." The sentence had sounded rehearsed, like something he had said many times but rarely meant. For some reason, Ethan believed he meant it that day. After that, it became a pattern. Every morning, just before the overpass, Ethan's truck would slow down. Every morning, there was Arthur, already on the sidewalk, bike at his side, as if he had been waiting for that exact moment. Sometimes the chain really had slipped. Sometimes the front tire needed a little more air. Sometimes Ethan suspected Arthur was manufacturing problems just for the few minutes of conversation. Not that Ethan minded. "How's the little one?" Arthur would ask, leaning on the handlebars while Ethan worked. "Harper's good," Ethan would answer. "She's got a science fair coming up. Built a model of the solar system out of foam balls and glitter. It'll be cleaning glitter for the next decade." Arthur's eyes would warm, the creases at their edges deepening. "My son built one once," He'd say softly, gaze drifting somewhere far beyond the highway. "He used ping-pong balls and fishing line. We hung it from his ceiling." "What's his name?" Ethan asked once. Arthur's jaw flexed, and he looked down, fingers tightening on the handlebars. "Used to be Dad," he said after a moment. "That's the only name that matters." Ethan didn't push. He recognized the particular shape of that pain, the way it moved, the way it sat in the throat like a stone. One Thursday, the rain came down in steady sheets, turning the road into a mirror. Ethan nearly drove past the turn, the wipers barely keeping up. He almost convinced himself Arthur would stay home that day, but there he was, soaked through, scarf dripping, hands trembling harder than Ethan had ever seen as he tried and failed to keep the bike upright on the slick sidewalk. Ethan pulled over, heart climbing into his throat. "Mr. Walker," he called, jogging toward him. "You're going to catch pneumonia out here." Arthur shook his head, droplets flinging from his cap. "Can't miss my ride," he grunted. "Where are you going that's worth this?" Ethan asked, grabbing the handlebars to steady the bike. Arthur hesitated. "Nowhere important," he said. Then, after a beat, "Everywhere important." It wasn't until weeks later that Ethan would understand what he meant. On a morning when the sky finally cleared, Arthur pointed at a coffee shop down the street from the overpass, the kind of place with mismatched chairs, fogged-up windows, and a chalkboard sign out front promising bottomless refills in messy handwriting. "Ever been in there?" Arthur asked. "Can't afford bottomless," Ethan joked. Arthur snorted. "Bottomless is just an excuse for them to charge you for the first cup." They went in anyway. The bell over the door chimed as they entered. Warm air, thick with the smell of espresso and cinnamon, wrapped around them. A young barista with a septum ring and purple hair glanced up, then smiled automatically. "Morning," she said. "What can I get you?" Arthur patted his pockets like he was searching for something, but Ethan could see the embarrassment creeping up his neck. "I've got it," Ethan said quickly. "One medium drip. Black. And—" he glanced at the pastry case, at the prices, at his mental balance sheet. "And whatever muffin is least likely to fall apart." The barista laughed. "Blueberries pretty stable." They took their drinks to a small table near the window. Outside, the overpass loomed, cars passing in streaks of gray and red. Arthur cupped his hands around the mug, as if soaking in the heat. For the first time, Ethan noticed how thin his wrists were, the way his veins stood out like wires. "You didn't have to do this," Arthur said. "You already fix my bike for free. You're ruining my reputation as a grumpy hermit." Ethan shrugged, though inside, his stomach pinched at the thought of the few dollars he'd just spent. "It's just coffee," he said. "Besides, everyone needs a place to sit where they're seen." Arthur's grip tightened around the mug. His eyes lifted, searching Ethan's face. "That's a rare thing," he said quietly. "Being seen." For a long moment, they sat in companionable silence. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations swelled and ebbed around them. Ethan looked at Arthur and wondered not for the first time what story lived behind those pale eyes, what invisible weight made his shoulders bow, what loss had hollowed out the spaces between his sentences. But he didn't ask. Sometimes, he had learned, the kindest thing you can offer someone is company without questions. The first morning Arthur wasn't there. Ethan noticed the absence the way you notice a missing tooth with your tongue. He slowed down automatically near the overpass, eyes scanning the sidewalk. The sun was barely up, the air sharp with frost. A few early commuters huddled in coats, heads down, moving fast. No blue bicycle, no faded baseball cap, no hunched shoulders silhouetted against the dull sky. Ethan's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He told himself Arthur had probably just slept in. Or maybe the rain from the night before had finally convinced him to stay home. He drove on. The second morning, the sidewalk was empty again. By the third morning, the familiar tightness in Ethan's chest wasn't just the cold. He pulled his truck over anyway, hazard lights blinking like a heartbeat, and sat there for a moment, watching the place where Arthur usually stood. How quickly a habit turns into a hole when it's gone, he thought. He almost laughed at himself. Arthur Walker was an old man head known for a handful of months. Ethan had bandaged pipes longer than that, and yet, the day dragged at the school. Every sound seemed louder than it needed to be. The squeak of sneakers on the gym floor, the slam of lockers, the shriek of the fire alarm during a scheduled drill. By lunchtime, Ethan's nerves felt sandpapered. "You okay, man?" asked Jared, the other maintenance worker, as they sat on overturned buckets in the boiler room, eating sandwiches from plastic bags. "Yeah," Ethan lied, chewing cardboard turkey on cheaper white bread. "Just didn't sleep much." It wasn't until he pulled into his apartment complex that evening, the sky painted in bruised shades of purple and blue, that the day tipped from unsettling to surreal. He parked the truck in its usual spot under the flickering lamppost. The bulb buzzed overhead, attracting a few stubborn moths that hadn't gotten the memo about the season. Harper's backpack was visible through the living room window, slung over the back of the couch. That meant she was home from after-school care. He smiled automatically at the sight. Then he saw the car. It was black, sleek, and painfully out of place in the cracked asphalt lot, a government sedan, the kind Ethan had only seen in movies or parked outside federal buildings downtown. Two people stood near it. A woman in a dark navy suit, her hair pulled back into a low bun. A man in a gray suit, broader shoulders. A folder tucked under his arm. Ethan's steps slowed as he approached the building. The man looked up first, checking something on a piece of paper, then comparing it to Ethan's face. "Mr. Ethan Miller?" the woman called, her voice carrying just enough to reach him without sounding like a shout. Ethan glanced toward his apartment window on instinct, suddenly aware of the oil stains on his jeans, the scuff on his work boots, the smear of caulk on his forearm from a repair earlier. Yeah," he said, "that's me. Is something wrong?" The man opened his mouth, but it was the woman who spoke again. "My name is Lauren Hayes," she said, extending a hand. "This is my colleague, Daniel Cho. We're with the U.S. Attorney's Office." Ethan's heartbeat stumbled. Look, if this is about a parking ticket or something, I swear I thought that spot was fey." "It's not about you being in trouble," Lauren interrupted gently. "It's about a man named Arthur Walker." The world seemed to narrow, the distant sounds of traffic and a dog barking down the block fading into a dull buzz. "Arthur?" Ethan repeated. "Is he okay?" Lauren's expression softened, just slightly. "I'm sorry to tell you this, Mr. Miller," she said. "Mr. Walker passed away 2 nights ago. Peacefully. In his sleep." The words landed like stones in Ethan's stomach. Passed away. Peacefully. 2 nights ago. Without realizing it, he reached for the railing of the stairwell, his fingers digging into the cold metal. I don't understand," he said quietly. "Why are you here?" "I barely knew him." Daniel shifted the folder under his arm and opened it. "Mr. Walker listed you by name in several documents we've been handling," he said. "You're mentioned in his will." Ethan stared at them. "He what?" Lauren nodded, watching him closely. "If you have a few minutes," she said, "we'd like to explain." Harper's face appeared suddenly in the apartment window, her palms pressed against the glass. She spotted Ethan and waved, her grin wide and easy, unaware of the gravity gathering on the ground below. Ethan forced a smile back, lifting his hand in return. Then he turned to the two attorneys. "Okay," he said, his voice steadying. "Let me just tell my daughter it'll be upstairs in a bit. Then you can tell me why in the world a retired old man with a stubborn bicycle would put me in his will." He tried to make it sound like a joke. It only came out tired. The conference room in the federal building downtown smelled faintly of coffee and paper recycled, filtered, and poured, day after day. Ethan sat at one end of the long table, hands resting on the smooth surface, thumbs tracing invisible circles. On the wall, an American flag stood in one corner, unmoving in the air-conditioned stillness. Across from him, Lauren and Daniel laid out a neat stack of documents. "I should probably start with what you already know," Lauren said. "How long had you been seeing Mr. Walker regularly?" Ethan shrugged, eyes flicking to the window where the city moved in miniature far below. "I don't know," he said. "Couple of months? Maybe longer. We never really marked a start date. I just saw him one day, and then he kept being there." "And your relationship was purely casual?" Daniel asked, pen poised over a legal pad. "No formal business agreements? No money exchanged beyond, say, buying coffee?" Ethan gave a short, humorless laugh. "If there were business agreements involved, I definitely missed the memo," he said. "I fixed his bike. We talked. I bought him coffee a couple of times. That's it." Lauren and Daniel exchanged a brief look, then Lauren turned a page in the file. "Arthur Walker," she began, "wasn't just a retired man with an old bicycle. He was a former aerospace engineer who worked on several classified projects for the government in the 72nds and 82nds. After he retired, he did consulting work for various private firms and invested wisely." Ethan blinked. "Invested," he repeated. "Very wisely," Daniel said, sliding a single-page summary toward him. Columns of numbers marched down the paper, incomprehensible and stark. Ethan's eyes snagged on the final line, total portfolio value. His brain tripped over the commas. "You're telling me Arthur was—" He swallowed. "Rich? Comfortable," Lauren corrected. "But more importantly, private. He had very few close contacts in his later years." She paused. Except, it seems, for you. Ethan felt suddenly too warm, the collar of his work shirt prickling against his neck. That doesn't make any sense, he said. Why me? Instead of answering, Lauren slid another document across the table. This is a copy of his will, she said. Portions of it are sealed under national security regulations due to his work history. But the sections involving you are straightforward. Ethan stared at the page. The first paragraph was a tangle of legal language. The second was clearer. To Mr. Ethan Miller of Portland, Oregon, I bequeath. His eyes skipped down the lines, catching on phrases. $350,000 from my personal savings and retirement accounts. My workshop property, located at contents of said workshop in full, no expectation. Only hope that he will choose to use this space for the benefit of others. Ethan's mouth went dry. Is this a joke? He asked, his voice rough. It's very real, Daniel said. The accounts have been verified. The property is legally his to transfer. What about his family? Ethan demanded. He mentioned a son once. And something about the Air Force. Lauren nodded slowly. His son, Christopher, enlisted in the Air Force at 19, she said. He and his wife died in a car accident over 10 years ago. They left behind a boy, Arthur's grandson, who was raised mostly by his mother's family. There were complicated feelings there. Ethan thought of Arthur's eyes when he had mentioned his son. The way his fingers had closed around the coffee mug, knuckles white. So his grandson gets nothing? Ethan asked. He gets some, Daniel replied. There are trusts and remaining assets designated for him. But the workshop and this particular sum were very specifically left to you. He tapped the will lightly. And, he added, there's this. He opened a small manila envelope and slid a handwritten letter across the table. Ethan recognized the shaky, careful script instantly. Ethan, it began. His own name, written in ink by a man who was no longer alive. He held the letter carefully, as if it might crumble. We haven't read it, Lauren said. It's addressed to you. You don't have to open it now. But I would advise you to consider it before making any decisions about the inheritance. There may be context there. Decisions, Ethan repeated. What kind of decisions could there be? Either I say yes, or I say no, right? Lauren tilted her head. Sometimes accepting a gift changes more than your bank balance, she said gently. Sometimes it changes your life. That can be harder than it sounds. On the way home, the city lights blurred into streaks through the windshield. Ethan parked outside his building, but stayed in the truck for a long moment, engine idling. The letter sat on the passenger seat, its weight disproportionate to its size. He thought about the $350,000. He thought about the workshop. He thought about hospital bills, about Harper's inhalers, about the way she sometimes pretended not to see the overdue notices tucked into the stack of mail on the kitchen counter. He also thought about the grandson he had never met, about blood ties, about fairness, about the way grief can calcify into resentment if you're not careful. Dad? Harper's voice came from the doorway of the building. She had slipped outside without him noticing, her jacket zipped up to her chin, hair pulled into two messy braids. You're home late, she said, hugging herself against the chill. Ethan killed the engine and climbed out, closing the door with a soft thud. Got held up, he said. By what? She asked. He glanced back at the letter through the window. Then he looked at her, at the slight furrow between her brows that made her look too much like Mia. By a man with an old bicycle, he said. And a few surprises I wasn't ready for. The workshop sat at the edge of an industrial district Ethan had never had reason to visit. It was a squat brick building with a corrugated metal roof, tucked between a storage facility and a tire shop. The sign out front was faded, the lettering almost illegible. Walker Systems. Ethan parked outside the chain-link fence, key heavy in his pocket. The key had been taped inside the letter. He had opened the letter at his kitchen table. After Harper had gone to bed, the apartment quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional whoosh of a passing car. Ethan. If you're reading this, it means I've done something I've always been better at in theory than in practice planning ahead. You're probably wondering why a man who knows you mostly from a stretch of cracked sidewalk and a cheap coffee shop would leave you anything at all, let alone what you've just heard about. The simple answer is, because you stopped. You stopped your truck. You stopped your day. You stopped long enough to look at an old man and see more than an obstacle. Most people stopped doing that a long time ago. The longer answer, well, that's what the workshop is for. The world you see on paper, numbers in my accounts, labels on my property, that's just residue. The important things are in that building. Notes, designs, mistakes, a few small triumphs, pieces of a life spent trying to build something that might outlast me. I should have passed it all to my son. Life had other plans. I should have passed it all to my grandson. Grief had other plans. So I'm passing it to you. You're under no obligation. You owe me nothing. If you choose to sell the place and use the money to make life easier for you and that little girl you talk about, I'll be the last person to judge. But if, by some chance, you feel the same tug I did all those years ago, the sense that maybe our hands are meant to build more than just what's in front of us, then I hope you'll unlock the door, take a look around, and consider a different possibility. Use it as a place where people get seen. Kids, tired fathers, curious minds with nowhere else to go. Use it as a place where a small act of kindness can turn into something bigger than either of us. Whatever you decide, thank you for those mornings on the overpass. They were worth more than you know. Arthur, now, standing at the workshop gate, the weight of Arthur's words pressed against Ethan's ribs. He pushed open the gate with a squeal of metal on metal. The parking lot was cracked, tufts of grass pushing through the asphalt like stubborn hope. At the door, he fumbled with the ring of keys, until one slid into the lock, and turned with a reluctant click. The smell hit him first when he stepped inside. Oil, metal, dust. A faint hint of coffee, long since dried in mug rings on a workbench. Rows of shelves lined the walls, stacked with labeled boxes. Capacitors, copper wire, prototype parts. Do not toss. On one side of the room stood a long work table cluttered with tools, wires, and a half-disassembled machine that looked like a cross between a generator and an art project. In the far corner, a corkboard covered in yellowing papers took up half the wall. Diagrams, equations, newspaper clippings, and grainy photos overlapped in a chaotic collage. Strings connected some of them, red lines linking seemingly unrelated points. Ethan walked toward it slowly. Here was Arthur in a grainy black and white photo, younger, hair thicker, standing in front of what looked like a rocket engine test stand. Here he was again. Decades later, cutting a ribbon in front of a wind farm. A newspaper headline read, "Local engineer pioneers hybrid energy storage system." Another, more recent, was smaller, tucked near the bottom. Retirement project aims to inspire next generation of makers. Pinned near the center of the board was a photo Ethan recognized. It was the coffee shop, the window where they had sat. Through the glass, he could see a blurred reflection of himself and Arthur at the table. Underneath it, in Arthur's shaky handwriting, were the words, "He stopped." Ethan reached up and touched the edge of the photo with gentle fingers. "Who were you, really?" he whispered. He spent hours wandering the workshop, opening drawers, flipping through notebooks. The notebooks were dense with calculations and sketches, loops and lines that might as well have been written in another language. But here and there, in the margins, softer notes appeared. Tested prototype with neighborhood kids. Light stayed on 47 minutes longer than expected. Their faces when the bulbs didn't go out, worth every failure. Tried to talk to Jason about this. He says there's no money in inspiration. Hes not wrong. Hes just not right, either. Grief is a closed loop. You have to cut the wire somewhere if you want the current to flow again. As the afternoon faded into evening, a car door slammed outside. Ethan tensed. The workshop door opened without a knock. A man in his late 20s stepped in, suit slightly too expensive for the neighborhood, eyes scanning the room with a mixture of calculation and disdain. "Figures," he said. He left it exactly the way he lived, cluttered and inconvenient. Behind him, a woman Ethan didn't know followed, arms crossed, expression cool. "Can I help you?" Ethan asked, straightening. The man looked at him. His gaze flicked over Ethan's worn boots, his washed-out flannel, the smudge of grease on his forearm. "You're Ethan," he said, voice flat. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "And you are?" "Jason Walker," the man said. "Arthur's grandson." Jason walked further into the workshop as if he owned the air inside it. Technically, Ethan supposed, he owned some of it. Grief and entitlement often traveled together. "I see he brought out the museum pieces for you," Jason said, glancing at the corkboard. Did he tell you the part where he turned down 3 separate buyout offers because he wanted control over the legacy? He made air quotes with 2 precise fingers. No, Ethan said. He mostly talked about your bike. Jason barked a short laugh. Of course he did, he muttered. He always did love symbols more than solutions. The woman behind him stepped forward, extending a hand. I'm Kelly, she said. I'm Mr. Walker's. I was his estate attorney. At least for the parts not sealed by the government. Her handshake was firm. I understand this is overwhelming, she added quietly. For everyone, Jason scoffed. What's overwhelming is that my grandfather decided to hand over a prime piece of real estate, and God knows what kind of tech to a maintenance guy he met on the street, he said. No offense. Some taken? Ethan said mildly. Jason bristled. Look, he said, drawing himself up. I don't know what he told you, but this place has serious potential. There are patents in his files that companies have been sniffing around for years. We could license the tech, sell the building, and everyone walks away with more money than they know what to do with. Everyone? Ethan asked. Or just you? Jason's jaw tightened. You get your money, he said. The chunk he set aside for you. Am not contesting that. Think of it as a finder's fee. But this, he gestured around the workshop, this place, this equipment, this name. It should stay in the family. My family. Ethan looked around. He saw the dusty prototypes, the notebooks filled with more questions than answers. He saw the photo labeled He Stopped. He saw the corner where a few worn chairs circled a scarred table, as if people used to sit there and argue and dream. He thought of Arthur's letter. Use it as a place where people get seen. I'm not sure this was ever about money for him, Ethan said. Jason rolled his eyes. That's the luxury of someone who already has it, he snapped. You think him heartless? I lost parents too, you know. I lost a grandfather who was more interested in salvaging his conscience than salvaging our lives. This workshop was supposed to be ours, mine. He promised my dad Head keep the name alive. Ethan hesitated. Promises, he knew, could drown a man if he held them wrong. What if keeping the name alive doesn't look like selling it, he asked. Jason stared at him. What are you proposing? He demanded. Kelly cleared her throat softly. There is another option, she said. One that Arthur mentioned to me in passing, though he never formalized it on paper. The city has been expanding its community programming. If the right case were made, this could be designated as a non-profit innovation center. The Walker Innovation Center. It would stay in the family name, but be used for public benefit, especially youth education. Jason laughed. Disbelief and irritation tangled together. You're suggesting we turn a multi-million-dollar asset into a charity? He said. I'm suggesting we turn it into what he seems to have wanted it to be in the first place, Kelly replied calmly. She looked at Ethan. There's a city council meeting next month, she said. They're hearing proposals for new after-school initiatives, STEM programs, that kind of thing. If you wanted to pitch the idea, the timing would be fortuitous. Ethan opened his mouth to protest. He fixed leaky pipes. He changed light bulbs. He could rebuild a carburetor with his eyes half closed. He did not stand in front of councils and pitch visions. Then he thought of Harper's science fair project. The way her eyes had lit up when she explained orbit paths, hands flying through the air, the way she had said, I wish we had a place where kids could actually build stuff, not just read about it. He thought of Arthur at the coffee shop, hands wrapped around a mug, saying, being seen is rare. What if I mess it up? He asked quietly. Kelly's gaze softened. What if you don't? She countered. The city council chambers were more intimidating than Ethan had expected. Rows of chairs filled with people in varying degrees of impatience. A long, elevated dais where council members sat behind nameplates and microphones. A digital clock that glared red numbers, counting down the time allowed for each speaker. Ethan sat near the back, hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles ached. Harper sat beside him, swinging her feet just above the floor, a folder of drawings in her lap. She wore her favorite galaxy-patterned sneakers. You can do this, she whispered, leaning into his shoulder. You explain broken things to me all the time. That's different, he murmured. How? She asked. He didn't have a good answer. Names were called, proposals were heard, discussed, tabled. Finally, Mr. Ethan Miller, Walker Innovation Center proposal, the clerk announced. The words didn't sound like they fit together. Ethan stood, legs humming with nervous energy. As he walked to the podium, he could feel eyes on him, curious, expectant, bored. He cleared his throat, adjusting the microphone. "Good evening," he began. His voice came out rough, so he tried again. "My name is Ethan Miller. I'm a maintenance worker at Lincoln High. I'm also a widowed father." Which isn't technically relevant but feels important to say. A few people chuckled softly. Some of the tension in his shoulders eased. "I'm here because of a man who used to push a stubborn bicycle across an overpass every morning," he continued. "His name was Arthur Walker. To most people, he was just an old guy in a worn-out coat, the kind of person you drive past without thinking about twice." He paused. "I stopped," he said, "not because I'm special, because his chain fell off and it felt wrong to keep going." He described the coffee shop, the small table by the window, the way Arthur's hands had shaken and then stilled around a warm mug. "He never told me he was an engineer," Ethan said. "He never told me about patents or projects or any of the things that show up on paper when someone dies. What he did tell me was that being seen mattered. That the world forgets people like him. That kids need places where their curiosity is more important than their test scores." He told the council about the workshop, about the notebooks filled with equations and hope, about the photo labeled "HE stopped." "Arthur left that workshop to me," he said. "He also left money that could fix a lot of immediate problems in my life. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't tempted to just take the cash and walk away. I've got hospital bills, rent, a kid who loves science more than I understand." Harper smiled up at him from her seat, eyes bright. "But he also left me a choice," Ethan said. "Sell it? Or turn it into what he always meant it to be, a place where people get seen?" He gestured toward the folder in Harper's lap. "My daughter and I mocked up some ideas," he said. "After-school programs where kids from all over the city can come, learn how to build things. Workshops where retirees who used to work in trades or tech can teach. A space where the next Arthur Walker or the next kid who loves foamball solar systems can find someone who sees them." He took a breath. "I'm not a businessman," he finished. "I'm not a polished speaker. I fix what's broken, one thing at a time. This," he motioned toward the workshop address on the proposal, "feels like the biggest broken thing I've ever been asked to fix. I'm asking for your help to do it. Not for me, but for everyone who's ever felt invisible on their way across a bridge." When he stepped back, his legs felt weak. The council members asked questions. About zoning, about funding, about liability. Kelly answered some, having anticipated the legal angles. Ethan answered others, speaking from the only place he knew how, from the truth of his mornings, his exhaustion, his quiet hope. Jason sat in the second row, arms crossed, jaw tight. When the time came for public comment, he stood. "I'm Jason Walker," he said. "Arthur was my grandfather. I came here ready to argue that this workshop should be sold, that the money would go further in different ways, that we deserved it." He swallowed, looking at Ethan. "But the thing is," Jason continued, "he didn't stop for me. I drove past him too. For years. And I never stopped." The room was very quiet. "I don't know what that says about me," Jason said. "But I know what it says about him." He nodded at Ethan. "If my grandfather trusted this man with his legacy, the least I can do is not get in the way." He turned to the council. "I support the Walker Innovation Center proposal," he said. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. 6 months later, the workshop buzzed with a very different kind of energy. The shelves were cleaner, some of the older equipment replaced or repurposed. Bright posters covered the walls, drawn by kids who now roamed the space after school, their voices bouncing off the high ceiling. Tables were scattered with half-built robots, cardboard bridges, circuits on breadboards, and more foamball solar systems than Ethan could count. A banner hung over the main workbench, "Walker Innovation Center, where everyone gets seen." Ethan stood by the doorway, watching Harper show a younger boy how to solder safely, her movements careful and confident. "Remember," she said, "it's not about being perfect, it's about not being afraid to try again." Her words sounded like something Arthur might have written in the margin of a notebook. "Mr. Miller?" Ethan turned. An older man stood at the entrance, shoulders slightly hunched, a worn jacket buttoned up to his throat. His hands shook faintly as he held a folded flyer, the same ones they'd been passing around at schools and community centers. "Hi," Ethan said, stepping forward. "Welcome. You here to check the place out?" The man glanced around, eyes wide, like head walked into a memory he hadn't expected to see again. "My grandkids live out of state," he said. "I heard about this place from the librarian down on 7th. She said you let old guys come in and watch." Ethan smiled, the warmth rising from somewhere deep and steady. "We let old guys come in and build," he said, "or just sit, or tell stories about how things used to work. Whatever you've got, well, take it." The man hesitated. "I don't want to get in the way," he murmured. Ethan thought of a cracked sidewalk, a sagging bicycle chain, a man who had once said, "America needs more men like you." "You won't be in the way," Ethan said. "You'll be right where we need you." He led the man inside. Harper looked up, eyes curious, taking in the new visitor. She gave him a bright, easy smile. "Hi," she said. "I'm Harper. Do you want to see what we're building?" The man's shoulders relaxed, just a little. His fingers loosened around the flyer. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I think I'd like that." As they walked further into the room, the light from the high windows fell across their faces, an old man and a young girl, side by side at a workbench. Ethan stayed by the doorway a moment longer, watching. Sometimes, he thought, a small act of kindness really did change an entire life. Not just for the person you stopped for on a cold morning, but for everyone who found their way into the space that kindness left behind. In the end, Ethan didn't just inherit a building or a bank balance. He inherited a different way of seeing the world. Arthur spent a lifetime engineering machines and building quiet wealth, yet the investment that outlived him was a single human connection. His notebooks, patents, and prototypes mattered, but what truly reshaped the future was the moment he chose to trust a stranger who stopped. Ethan thought he was just fixing a stubborn bike chain. Instead, he was restoring the dignity of a man who felt invisible. And when Arthur's legacy flowed into the Walker Innovation Center, that same kindness multiplied into kids and elders who were finally seen. So, ask yourself, who are the silent Arthurs in your life? The people you pass every day but never really notice. If stories like this remind you that the greatest returns come from investing in people, not things, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Every week, I'll bring you more heartfelt, true stories that quietly rebuild our faith in humanity, one ordinary person at a time. Because behind all the noise, there are still men like Arthur and fathers like Ethan quietly changing the world in small ways. And maybe, just maybe, the next life-altering moment is hiding inside a gesture so small you almost talk yourself out of making it. Because no matter how big the legacy or how ordinary the day, one small act of kindness can change an entire life.